This is so interesting. Friends have deeply interpreted the concept of taking a risk to turn a bicycle into a motorcycle. Although there was a similar Mi 11 Ultra before, it's still hard to believe that such a daring setup would appear on Xiaomi, which has been cautious for at least the past 3 generations, aiming for stability and universality. After 8 years of repeated failures with bar phones, what exactly made it soar? Is the cross-generation naming truly deserving, or is it just a marketing-oriented tribute to the so-called Xiaomi 17 Pro? Let's do a simple study. It's important to note that since we didn't have time to take sample photos, the imaging part will have to wait for another day. Besides, since the 15 series has already become obsolete and revived, there's not much left to reference except the 15S Pro, so we'll have to make do. Despite the 17 Pro's battery growing by 900 mAh to 6300 mAh and adding the dual display, it keeps a compact design like the 15 standard version with no big change in size, weight, or feel. It's just as exquisite, small, and compact with almost no comfort issues or handling anxiety. The new dual display doesn't affect the device's weight balance. However, whether you use your left or right hand, your fingers might sometimes feel cramped, but it's a bit better with the right hand. Pressing up on the screen doesn't matter much, and the ultra-wide angle is a bit awkward. If you use it in portrait mode, keep your grip below the midline or it'll block the fill light. Compared to landscape games, I think it's better now, especially when using the main camera with your left hand. The dual screen creates space, reducing the feeling of having nowhere to place your fingers, making it stable to hold. Whether this dual screen covering the core heating area will hinder cooling, we'll see later. There's no need to say much about its looks. The core is undoubtedly the back screen. Although this type of design isn't exactly groundbreaking tech, we've become accustomed to it in small foldables. However, to be honest, when it actually appears on a straight phone, it still catches the eye and is quite appealing, interesting, and novel, making the recently released iPhone 17 seem like it's from the last century. It also gives the impression that whether it's the earlier Meizu Smart Window, the later Nubia dual screen, or the Mi 11 Ultra, it seems like this dual screen concept has never felt so natural, reasonable, and full of vitality. Perhaps the world has long suffered from monotony, regardless of its practicality. At least in terms of emotional value, it indeed has something. What do you think of Xiaomi's design this time, and how would you rate it? Share your thoughts in the comments. The 17 Pro's dual screen hardware quality is up for debate. The PPI is slightly less than the main screen, but for brightness, color, refresh rate, eye protection, dimming, and touch sampling, it aligns with the main screen with no technical or experiential gaps. Check the table for details. Notably, it shares brightness control with the main screen, with synchronized manual adjustments and activation. In tests, the manual minimum brightness can reach 1 meter, with the AOD around 0.36 nits. Power use is about 0.03 watts for manual full screen use, with max brightness of 658 nits using around 0.22 watts. Even fully active at 1158 nits, it seems to stay under 0.5 watts. In practice, I think this isn't a worry. If you turn off the back screen's always-on display in settings, it won't light up by itself unless you double tap it, even if the main screen is on.
The backlight sensor ensures that when it's blocked, like face down on a table, in a pocket, or in a bag, the rear screen turns off automatically, saving power. The main functions revolve around clock wallpaper, fun dynamic effects, notification reminders, and main camera photography. Aside from a slight expansion with mini-games, it is generally separated from the main screen, focusing on reasonable benefits without any overly aggressive actions. Although the screen is 2.67 inches with a 16:10 ratio, the effective range is only about 70%. In the nearly square 2.1-inch space, you can't expect too much. However, in the future, features like AI companion, robot support signs, or customizable widgets that don't require intensive touch interaction could be considered. It supports essential functions and is user-friendly. Double tap to toggle the screen, swipe down for notifications, right for the camera, up to return, and long press to change wallpaper. The camera features are comprehensive, allowing full focal length for photos and videos. It supports custom symbols for photography and can fill the screen. Plus, it has a gesture shutter and main screen preview, letting the subject see results in real time, which is practical. The game needs a retro handheld case to power on. The case is precisely crafted, moderately soft and hard, easy to put on and remove, and feels comfortable. However, the surface may get greasy. It has a spring-loaded button, and even if not used for gaming, it looks fine as a decoration. The case includes a 200 mAh graphite battery requiring a specific magnetic charger, which can be a bit cumbersome. Once the gadget powers on, it auto-connects via Bluetooth to the back screen and syncs with the Game Center. It currently supports 4 games that can be installed and launched with a click. If you're a bit adventurous, you can try the recommended all-in-one retro game emulator. In theory, no matter what platform you played on as a kid, even Windows 95, 98, or DOS, you can install them and relive childhood memories. The perks include ultra-high compatibility, and this emulator allows for custom shader emulation like CRT monitor effects to avoid distortion of old game graphics, offering a very authentic experience. The downside is it can be a hassle. It's clear there's not much dedicated adaptation yet, it's just an entry point and the rest depends on one's hands-on skills, catering to enthusiasts. Regarding other vibrations, there's been little change due to the device's limited space, but it remains usable. The distortion isn't too exaggerated. In actual experience, like in Peace Elite, it still simulates a certain impact feel. The interface transmission compatibility is solid, power supply is ample, and disk selection is fine. The supported rate hasn't been upgraded. In tests, direct PC transfer is pretty fast, with imports hitting up to 585 MB per second, matching the 5 Gbps speed. The 15S Pro and 15 Pro look alike, but the compact 17 Pro stands out, boasting sound quality that surpasses expectations. Those who know the 15S Pro can compare their experiences.
This one's for you and me.
The screen's spectral reflection has slightly lessened, but overall it's mostly unchanged. Brightness-wise, the manual minimum now hits 1 nit. The major change is the removal of the odd sunlight mode, now directly integrated. Maximum brightness for full screen activation reaches nearly 1800 nits, a 67% rise. The 10% window HDR remains from the 15 Pro, about 3700 nits, simulating a strategy that begins aggressively at full power, exceeding the Samsung S25 Ultra's 1500 nits by 200. Dim blue light performance is solid. Compared to the 15S Pro, the peak shifted right by almost 1 nanometer, estimated at 462.4, and high energy blue light dropped 35%, which is quite low. I think there's no need to enable eye protection mode now. The flicker situation is unique. System settings offer 2 modes, full DC and full PWM. The first has a high duty cycle at full brightness, reaching nearly 90% even in low light. The second uses 360 Hz dimming, switching to a 2106 SPM curve below 15 nits, referencing the 15S Pro, while pausing full low absorption focused on visual perception. In PWM mode, since the switch point moved forward, brightness between about 13 to 65 nits is similar to before, but below 12 nits, the low light part has more advantages. Personally, I'm not sensitive to flickering, so the hertz doesn't really matter to me. To be honest, I actually prefer the full PWM mode because the display response time is faster, with an average GDG reduction of 24% resulting in less ghosting. In fact, it can almost be compared to the Samsung S25 Ultra in terms of normal low-light grayscale range, which is very uniform. However, in extreme cases below 0.1 nits, there might still be some blotchiness, not as well controlled as the current generation of Samsung. The phenomenon is more pronounced in full PWM mode, but there's no need to worry because it's not something you encounter in everyday use. It seems that the 17 Pro, by sacrificing a bit of dynamic range, significantly darkens the brightness of these grayscales compared to before, making them appear more like black. Although this approach slightly conflicts with the direction of the current image upgrade, it indeed achieves the effect of avoiding blotchiness. Color accuracy has improved. In default mode, whether by standard or Xiaomi's free CMFS RGB, the average color deviation is about 0.6. The adaptive P3 is a bit weaker, with the CMF average color deviation being 1 by standard. Also, color modes have been reorganized, now only keeping the default and vibrant options. When the default professional primary color is paired with a warm setting, it seems to become the CIE 1931 average color deviation, also 0.6. To make it less yellow, use the default CIE 2015, and for something more universal, then adding warm color reload allows the measured system UI to reach 300 Hz in games with 133 Hz and 237 Hz overlay acceleration. Overall, this firmware version may not have fully stabilized yet, as there is always some dip at half the frequency which might require further optimization. However, the good news is that it doesn't seem to affect click latency, and theoretically it should feel the same as the 15 Pro in actual use. In my opinion, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 5 Ultimate could simply be called the Snapdragon 8 Ultimate Leading Plus version for better understanding. Although it's not exactly straightforward overclocking, it does have some notable changes. The CPU part, for instance, refers to the Xiaomi 15 Pro's history of being a top performer, particularly in floating point calculations. Overall performance improved by 8.68%, with efficiency rising impressively by 19.8%. The performance alloy only upped the clock speed by 0.1 GHz, so the boost isn't huge, with a comprehensive performance increase of 2.08% and efficiency at 7.66%. Theoretical gains seem to favor gaming, but in practice, it depends on tuning and heat balance. Geekbench may have been optimized, or due to software's weighting issues, the numerical rise is indeed large. Referring to the Xiaomi 15 series, regardless of multi-core performance, it's over 20%, even compared to others.
The Snapdragon 8 Ultimate Edition on the Red Magic has achieved a significant improvement of about 10%. Although Antutu's total score is over 3.7 million, it depends on how you interpret it. The CPU part hasn't fully benefited, and the absolute value is not comparable to the extreme performance of the Snapdragon 8 Ultimate Edition in this area. We should observe it over time, then let's remove whitelist interference and conduct compression and decompression tests. It must be said that the gains in this part are quite significant, with compression time reduced by 17% and decompression dropping by 30%. In some ways, this means that compared to the previous version, which mainly focuses on integer operations and doesn't explore extreme limits in daily use, the improvement is quite close to what Geekbench suggests and could be very noticeable, with an ideal overall increase reaching up to 20%. Similarly, video transcoding compression without a whitelist is interesting, as the time taken in balanced mode drops by about 2%, aligning well with the recent Spike 06 performance core improvement estimate. However, it's worth noting that in performance mode, it matches the Snapdragon 8 Supreme Edition according to results from 2, suggesting that reaching the upper performance limit of the 5th generation Snapdragon 8 Supreme Edition might not be easy. Balancing cooling and performance isn't easy. The Xiaomi 17 Pro will likely fall within the 15 Pro's detailed range in this aspect. The GPU section in 3D Mark stays similar to the 15 Pro, but performance is up by about 10%. In the GFRX bench, it's simpler, as the frame rate hasn't even matched the previous version, yet the results are impressive, with overall performance up by at least 30% at 25 degrees Celsius. The 3D Mark stress test lets us explore this version's limits. The heat distribution of the Xiaomi 17 Pro, along with the surface's hottest temperature, shows no big difference from the 15 series. The frame rate results are mostly consistent, though average power use has dropped by about 10%. As expected, it's like overclocking with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 5 Ultra. With high-performance heat generation, it's not very promising. The 15 series had a GPU average temperature of 80 to 81 degrees, but the 17 Pro hit 91 degrees. Even though it handled an extra 10 degrees, it still touches the limit, making theoretical test benefits hard to fully achieve. However, in this situation, the compact 17 Pro creates space with its strong cooling and performance boost. It not only evaluates the rear screen obstruction, but also offers extra capacity, somewhat surpassing the large screen 15 Pro, which is quite impressive. Moving to actual gaming, as long as the surrounding temperature doesn't exceed that of the 15 Pro, it all hinges on whether the tuning can find the balance. In a 30°C setting for 30 minutes at max graphics in King of Glory 5v5, there are two views. Focusing on self-improvement, the 17 Pro's average power use is just under 3.1 watts, a cut of at least 14%. In terms of frame rate, internal and external temperatures, etc., it's nearly the same as the 15 Pro. On the other hand, considering the performance boost of the Xiaomi 17 Pro with its Snapdragon 8 Gen 5 chip, it's not very clear, seemingly a matter of tuning. It was relatively conservatively placed in the same range as the Snapdragon 8 Ultra to balance the heat. As for the more demanding V10, the results seem to be very similar to the 15 Pro, even in terms of power consumption. However, there is indeed some improvement here, with the stable frame time being extended. Genshin Impact at the highest graphics settings clearly shows effort. For a small screen like the 17 Pro, achieving full frames with an average of less than 4.5 watts was once almost unimaginable. The 1% low frame rate has increased by at least 80%, which is quite impressive and much better than the previous generation. However, while the temperature hasn't noticeably increased, it also hasn't improved, remaining consistent with the 15 Pro. It seems this part was entirely used to boost the frame rate. The Xiaomi 17 Pro from Xinjiang Railway has shifted its previous strategy, with performance intensity skyrocketing. Initially, the full frame part averaged nearly an 8-watt peak, even exceeding 10 watts. Given that even the Red Magic only hits 7 watts, and with the GPU temperature reaching 91 degrees Celsius and nearby areas nearing 50 degrees Celsius, it's fair to say it's not fully optimized yet. We won't talk about future updates, but theoretically, it shouldn't go beyond the 6.8 watt limit during stress tests, as going over that would mean the surrounding temperature exceeds the 15 Pro. The results don't match the target. However, the highest quality in Ming Dynasty is more rational, with average power use aligning with the usual approach. Frame rate stays at a cool 32 degrees, nearly full frame, maintaining this for at least 12 minutes. The hottest spot averages 46.5 degrees Celsius. Switching to Vulkan boosts efficiency by 22%, extending stable operation to 15 to 20 minutes, averaging 54.2 frames. Overall temperature stays the same, but the internal GPU drops by 3 degrees and battery by 2. Performance is quite good. Adding a cooler should make running at full capacity no issue. For charging, the 100-watt fast charge peaks at 82.8 watts, averaging 4163 mAh. The battery auto-stops, hitting 20% in 5 minutes, 39% in 10 minutes, and fully charged in 38 minutes. Estimated capacity is around 6200 mAh, taking 41 minutes to fully charge to 6300 mAh. Overall, the Magic Double Screen doesn't really offer any high-tech features for bar phones and still hasn't completely escaped the awkwardness of being neither here nor there. However, in today's world where the marginal benefits of improvements in phone appearance, screen, image, and even performance have been exhausted, accurately capturing the novelty factor is undoubtedly a stroke of genius. Coupled with the entire device from almost any perspective, it truly deserves the name of a cross-generational pro in terms of comprehensive economy. This nearly perfect start is actually more about inevitability than luck. In conclusion, when it comes to the Xiaomi 17 Pro series, you can certainly approach it from various angles, bring up seemingly profound arguments, doubt, criticize, or even sneer at it. However, it seems ultimately undeniable that being the first to explore new ways to use a phone in the next stage is indeed the most pro upgrade. Alright, that concludes this video. Thank you very much for watching. I am Dashuge, and I look forward to seeing you next time.